In this video, we're going to cover the iZotope RX5 user interface. So we'll start with the main RX window because the bulk of what we have is here in this window. So we've got this section here where we can display the audio. We can either display it as a conventional waveform, like that, or we can display it purely as a spectrogram. And we'll look at this in more detail in another video, but basically we've got time across the x-axis and frequency across the y-axis, and the brighter the orange, the louder the audio is at that frequency. So most of the time I'll tend to have a bit of the waveform, unless I'm doing some detailed editing, in which case I'll remove the waveform altogether so I can see the spectrogram clearly. Next, we'll take a look at the transport section of the window, this section here. And there are actually two play buttons. So if I make a selection here, then the conventional play button will play all the audio for the duration of the selection. But this play button here with the dotted lines around it represents the dotted lines of the selection. So if I play with this button, it will only play what's inside the selection. And that's really, really useful when you're trying to identify specific sounds. And also there are two other options. At the moment, when I hit play, the cursor goes back to where it started from. But we can go into the transport menu. You can see here that playback returns on stop, Command R. So if I now use Command R on the keyboard, now hit play, when I hit stop, the cursor doesn't go back, so it's more like a tape machine. So each time I stop, the cursor stays where it is, and when I hit play, it carries on until I hit stop again. Whereas if I hit Command R again, now what happens, we press play, and as soon as I hit stop, the cursor goes back to where it started from, so I can play from exactly the same place again. We've also got this option down here to enable looping. So if I just highlight that and take a selection and I hit play, and we can play the same selection over and over again. You can also turn the loop playback on from the transport menu or using the shortcut Command and L on a Mac, or you can just use the button down here to turn it on and off. Then you can use the return key for return to 0. So you can see now it's going to start playing from the beginning. So I place the cursor there, return, it plays from the beginning. Then we've got these two buttons down here for recording. It's been possible since RX3 to actually record straight into RX. And we'll be taking a look at that in more detail in another video. So we've got the conventional record button, you arm it, you hit record and play, and off you go. We've also got the option to turn on input monitoring so that we can actually set up and prepare a recording, make sure the levels are all good before we hit record. And as I say, we'll be looking at both those in more detail in a separate video. So now let's take a look at the zooming options. And if I place the cursor here, what happens is as I zoom in, it moves the cursor to the middle of the screen. So it's well worth placing the cursor first before you zoom in, because that way, whatever it is you're trying to look at will be in the middle of the screen. And we've got this really useful button here where we can just click it and it zooms out to show the whole file. So again, if you just get lost, sometimes when you zoom right in, it's very easy to get lost where you are. Now we've got another zoom option here, and if I make a selection, whatever is inside the selection, when I hit this button, will fill the screen completely, both time and frequency wise. So again, I can just click the return to the whole file and back we come. Now if you don't want to make a selection beforehand, so here I actually had to make a selection, what you can do is you can do it all in one hit. So I can highlight a section and you can see it's sort of a red patch, And again, whatever is inside the red area, as soon as I let go, I won't have to hit the other zoom button. It just fills the screen in one go, and then back out again. Then we've got this hand tool. If I just take away that selection, and we now zoom in a bit. Now with this hand tool, what we can do is I can literally get hold of the waveform and move it around. So I can move along to the next bit that I'm interested in. Obviously, if you lose the plot, you can zoom out a little bit, but you can move around the whole file with this hand tool. Alternatively, you can just get hold of the x-axis and move it around that way. So again, more than one way to do similar things. You choose which one works best for you. Next, we've got a brand new feature in RX5, which is the Instant Process button. And again, we'll take a look at this in detail in another video. But in essence, what I can do is I can make a selection. And in this case, I've got Attenuate active. And so when I make that selection, it immediately implements the Attenuate function. Whatever the settings are in the Attenuate function, away it goes. So it's a brand new feature in RX5. Will save you lots and lots of time. We'll just undo that for a moment. So next we've got our different selection tools. You've seen me use some of these already. So let's just turn off the instant process. So now what we can do is this first selection tool, we can make a selection and it selects across all frequencies. So it's just effectively a time selection. And we can make adjustments. Then the next one we've got is both time and frequency. So you can select a range of time and frequency, but it will always come out as some form of box, whether it's square or rectangular, obviously depends on your selection. Then this tool here allows us to make selections across the whole timeline, but for one particular frequency. So if you've got a particular problem bit of audio, you can select the same range of frequencies for the whole file. Then we've got a lasso tool, so you can basically draw a line around a particular piece of problem audio, so enabling you to select it. Or we've got a paintbrush tool. So again, you can basically work your way around, fill the area in, and you can change the paintbrush size. Click and hold, and now you can adjust the paintbrush size. So if you want something a bit bigger to make it easier to select a larger area, then you can do. Or if you need something for some very fine work, then again, you can adjust the paintbrush size just as you would in most photo editing software. So you can see that there's quite a lot of similarity in the way that we work with iZotope RX, especially in the spectrogram. There's a lot of similarity between photo editing software and the way that RX works. Then we've got this very interesting one here, the magic wand. So if I now just simply click on this section of audio here, this brighter selection, it instantly makes a selection. If I click on it again, it picks up all the appropriate harmonics that it thinks it can find for that same piece of audio. So it means you can pick up all the different harmonics. So let's just deselect that for a minute. And we'll go back to the magic wand and we'll make a selection, say here. We can also choose which harmonics that we want to add. So we can say we only want the third, the fifth, the seventh, or we can say we want all the harmonics up to 10 harmonics. That's an option. So we can actually manually select which harmonics we want, because sometimes you don't actually need to notch things out, all the harmonics, because the issues may only be some harmonics, especially when you're dealing with hums and buzzes. So that's another feature where you can choose which harmonics you want to pick up. You can just use the magic wand tool and then just click again and it automatically picks up any harmonics it can find. Now you've already seen me use the zoom tools here, but we can also zoom in and out simply by using the timescale zoom control here. So we can zoom right in, you can see right down to waveform level or back out again. So that's the x-axis. Now with the y-axis, we've actually got two displays. So let's just zoom right back out again. And let's get rid of that selection. When we've got both displays, both the waveform and the spectrogram displaying, we end up with two y-axes, one for the level for the waveform and one for the frequency. So once we go full waveform, you'll notice that the spectrogram y-axis clears. And equally, if we do full spectrogram, again, the y-axis for the waveform clears. So now we're just left with the frequency axis for the spectrogram. But when we've got them both displaying, we end up with two y-axes. Now, the other interesting thing is you can actually hover over the appropriate axis and zoom in or out by just scrolling with the scroll wheel. So all I'm doing here is just rolling the scroll wheel on my mouse. And you can do the same thing for the frequency. We can zoom in and we can move it around just as we did for the y-axis. Looking for a particular problem area and we just need to see it in a lot of detail, then we can do. And we've also got the option to zoom in and out with the zoom tool, so we can select the waveform and then use this slider here to zoom in and out on the waveform, or we can click the spectrogram and use the same slider to zoom in and out with the spectrogram. And then here we've got an indication of level. You can see the different color changes. So once it gets to white, it's absolute peak audio. Sort of yellow is pretty loud, orange down to sort of dark blue for very little audio indeed. Then we've got this section here where if I make a time and frequency selection, you can see that the selection now starts at 6 seconds and 708 milliseconds, finishes at 8 seconds and 926 milliseconds. Its total length 2 seconds and 218 milliseconds. And also we've got a similar set of numbers for the frequency. So we've started at 492.19 Hertz and we finish at 4,792.9 Hertz. At the moment, this bottom section is the start, end, and length or range for frequency for what we can see. So as we zoom in, you can see that these numbers change too. And if we zoom in on the frequency, you can see again the range for the frequency also changes. So we can see exactly what we're looking at both in terms of the whole spectrogram window and any selection that we have. And finally down the bottom we have our counter where the cursor is, and we have our level meter, which again follows a similar color format to the level we have for individual frequencies. So again, the louder it gets, the brighter the colors, the nearer to white we go in the case of the color choices we have here. So there we go, an overview of the iZotope RX5 window. In the next video, we're going to take a much more detailed look at the spectrogram section of the iZotope RX5 window.